My first question that I wanted to start with is how did you become a game developer? Can you sort of walk us through that journey
Yeah,
of like, were
I
you always
can,
into
sure.
games or did this come later in life?
Well, I was definitely into games as a kid. Yeah, I'm old enough, I'm afraid, that I was one of these people who got like a huge home computer when they were sort of 10, 11 years old and played very basic games on them. So yeah, and we could hack into them and program them, and we had the manuals, but there was no internet or anything like that. So I did enjoy games as a child, and I did do a certain amount of coding and stuff like that. Um, then fast forward to adult life, I was actually a science writer for many years. So I was just literally I was quite au fait with technical stuff and using computers and things like that, but I was writing about science and business and stuff like that.
How'd you get into that?
How did I get into that? I did a chemistry degree. I blew up everything I touched in the lab. That my professors were kind of worried about unleashing me into the wider world, I think. But luckily, towards the end of my degree, I had the opportunity to give a presentation about an area of science I was interested in, and they were like, this is what she can do. She can present, she can write, she can interview people, she can do that kind of stuff. Great. We'll send her off and try and get her to write about science instead of causing a hazard in the laboratory. So that's how I got into that. Yeah,
So
and
how
that
did it translate from writing science to programming and writing for games?
yeah, I mean, I have to say it is a little bit of a classic, oh, my husband helped me out story. So maybe not the most empowering for many people. But what was happening basically was I was working as a science writer, sometimes working full time for various people, sometimes as a freelancer. Alongside of that, since 2004, my husband Jake Burkett was basically started up his own games company, Grey Alien Games, and I was just sort of a silent partner in the business. So we would chat about businessy kind of stuff, and he would keep me up to date with what he was doing. But I was focused on my science writing career. As a result of that, I got to know various people in the games industry, and I had done little bits and pieces for people, like kind of testing other people's games for them and things like that. And had been to various offices and met people in the industry, but I hadn't gotten involved myself. But then around 2016, 2017, I was having a chat with Jake about games in general. And I literally just came up with an idea for a game. And people in game studios are very used to people who know nothing about games coming up to them and saying, I've got a great idea for a game. And they just sort of think, oh, here we go.
Right.
Um, and often it's not a sensible idea. But fortunately, in my case, when I suggested this game, which was a historical game, to Jake, he said, you know what? That could work. So that's how I got into games. Basically, I had to create a job. I had to create a position for myself because the company at that time just supported Jake and paying out for contractors like artists and musicians and people like that. So I went to Creative England, which is a funding body in the UK, and we pitched our game idea, which was Regency Solitaire, and I created a part-time position for myself, funded through that to get myself started. I was a complete newbie. I went from being quite an expert in being a writer about science and industry, which I knew a lot about, to being, kind of the junior who didn't really know much about making games. But I learned as I went along and carried on with a bit with my science writing career until I was confident. And yeah, after a couple of years, I was able to switch over to doing game design full time. So I've been very fortunate. But I did, I had a family member who helped me get on board, I have to say.
Hey, it helps. It helps you get your foot through the door. What inspired
Yeah,
you to think of Regency Solitaire? Because you mentioned that it's
yeah,
historical, and
that's
what was the
right.
inspiration for that?
Well, when I was a kid, I used to read a lot, and very often I would just go through my parents' bookshelves or whatever was in the library, just read whatever. And I ended up reading a lot of Regency romances by an author called Georgette Heyer. I also read, the normal sort of Jane Austen and things like that, but Georgette Heyer kind of stuck with me as having a particular type of story and a great deal of historical research in her stories. And when obviously Jane Austen was contemporary, whereas Georgette Heyer was writing in the 70s, mostly 60s and 70s when she wrote her work. So I looked a little bit more into Georgette Heyer as much later, many years later, and I found out that yeah, she did actually have kind of a team of researchers when she got popular who would really check all the facts. She had a great deal of Regency era language. There was a lot of detail about the clothes people were wearing. There were little, I mean, it wasn't really political, but there were little smatterings of politics or current historical events scattered through that were spot on. and I really liked that. I really liked that world. And one of the aspects of that world was that in Georgette Heyer's high society Regency world, you could win or lose a fortune, or maybe even your hand in marriage by gambling something on a hand of cards. And that's what kind of feeds into my work with Jake, and that he had made a best-selling card game called Fairway Solitaire, which was through Big Fish Games, who he later went on to work for full-time in Vancouver in Canada. So I knew a little bit about card games, and that was the idea that I brought to him. I sort of said, hey, how about making a game aimed at the casual market? So we were thinking about maybe women over 30 as the primary audience, not necessarily younger guys or whatever. The idea of this sort of romantic Regency storyline, the idea that you would be playing cards in the game, because contemporary of that time, there was this idea that gambling was really popular and playing card games was also just a really popular pastime. And that was why he said, yeah, I see where you're getting at here. This does all come together as a coherent kind of idea for a game, and let's work it out and see if we can make it fly.
So it started as an idea, as a story, and then you combined it with your husband's, because he'd made a solitaire game before. I actually saw his GDC speech.
That's right. Yeah, he had made solitaire games or a solitaire game previously that had done very well. So he understood how to make a good solitaire game. Yeah, that's right.
Right. Do you know what the inspiration was? The gameplay mechanics in Regency Solitaire and also Shadowhand are so interesting, unique, and it's not just a straight solitaire game, right? Like there's all sorts of like abilities and mechanics. Like you have to, you can burn up cards, you can unbundle cards, you have to find a key to unlock certain cards. Was that your idea? Was that Jake's idea?
I think we knew from playing a lot of our own games and other casual card games that casual players did very much expect those sort of fun power-ups and rewards. The gameplay had to be very rewarding. There was also this very sort of at the time well-worn structure where you had to make the first hour or so of gameplay free. So many people would have been playing this on platforms like iWin, Real Arcade, Big Fish Games, places like that, where the sort of way it works is that members get to play for an hour and then they decide whether or not they want to pick up the game after that. So yeah, there's a lot of very carefully orchestrated timing of making sure that the story moves along really quickly in the first few chapters. You're introduced to a ton of fun stuff really quickly. You get to try out lots of things. There's some really cool power-ups that do something that is really well tied in with the theme and the storyline really early on, so people go, oh yeah, I can see there's a lot to this. So yeah, very much a case of, I did have story ideas in mind and I had character ideas and things like that, but I very much had to learn when I first started out how to bend those to suit this particular game structure where a great deal of things have to happen and unroll, as it were, in the first hour of gameplay.
Yeah, I really like the design of Regency Solitaire and Shadowhand, and I was wondering about the sort of research that you had to do to get it historically accurate. Was that a help? Was that a hindrance? Was it like, oh, we have a historical background, we can, hang everything on this historical frame and it's easier? Or did you find it a hindrance because, oh gosh, I have to try to make it look somewhat realistic at least?
Yeah, no, actually that it was really helpful. So I started out by literally doing, I'm not an historian, I have some idea, but I was never studied history formally. So I literally went to museums which had displays of Regency artifacts. I took photographs of them or books. I mean, this was a book of my mother's who was a historian. She's about costume through the ages, so that had some really good ideas about the sort of clothes people used to wear. Yeah, I've got a couple of other hefty tomes about that kind of stuff. So I did the research. And then what you find, perhaps when we look back on any era, we know it's got a certain flavor, but very much sort of the colors that were in fashion for home furnishings were also in fashion for clothes, the kind of styles, the kind of trims, the kind of very much in the UK anyway, very much this sort of Roman or Greek classical influence to all the little architectural details, and the sort of style of clothing women were wearing was very much modeled on these kind of draped Greek statues. So yeah, once you kind of put the bits together for one part, like the backgrounds or whatever, you find that then the characters fit really well and the hairstyles are right and it all just kind of works. So yeah, but I enjoyed that. I enjoyed that a great deal. And I'm just researching the next Regency Solitaire game now, and I'm really enjoying doing it all over again with a slightly different sort of set of parameters, if you like. Yeah. We
Right.
also sort of homed in on a few kind of, so talking about the design, if you look at stuff like the UI, and I've sent you some bits of artwork there so you can refer to those. We definitely went and looked for Shadowhand and for Regency Solitaire, looked at things like jewelry or architectural details from the era, and you can see that the buttons and things like that are literally taken from, we would take a picture of some real Regency jewelry and then we would adapt that into a button for the screen. As you move around the map, there's little strings of pearls and stuff, and the things that they're held in look very much like the kind of woodwork that you see around, you know, stately homes and things here in Britain that were built in that era. So yeah, but just using all those details and putting it together just worked really well, and it was really fun as well. So yeah, we were quite pleased with it.
Yeah, I think the graphics are a huge part of the experience, and that they're actually really beautiful and fun. So it's not just the gameplay mechanics, but it's the whole visuals that sort of tie it all together. What about the music in Regency Solitaire? It's very, it
Yeah.
sounds very, you know, sort of 18th century, early 19th century, and I'm
Yeah.
wondering if where you got the
Well,
idea for that.
we literally hired a chap who's from the Netherlands, who we've never met in person, but he has helped us with the music for several of our games. And you know, our artists are based in Ukraine, so we very much have a sort of international thing where we just find the best people for what we're doing wherever they are, and we work remotely. So yes, our musician is based in the Netherlands, and we just sent him clips of music of the type of thing that we liked. We told him how we were going to use them. And as with most things in game design, it's kind of an iterative process. So he would come up with different little snatches of tunes and send them to us. And we'd then say, oh yeah, that one's really good for this, or that one's got too much of this in it. Can you make it more like that? You know, it's quite difficult when you're making music for a game, I think, because sometimes there's got to be a musical flourish that everybody's when it's da-da, something's happened, that's great. But a lot of the rest of the time, it's got to be kind of looped music that's quite low key. It maybe swells up a little bit to a slight crescendo, but you can't have anything too dramatic. Or, you know, it's got to be balanced so that it doesn't overpower you when you're listening to it. Because if you're playing
Right.
solitaire for hours, you might be listening to the same, you know, if you get stuck on one level, you might be listening to the same little refrain over and over again. So it's quite hard finding that balance actually between something that sounds true to the period or evokes the period and it's fun and is instantly recognizable as going along with your game, but isn't just like super annoying after you've heard it, you know, 30,
Over
40
and over and
times
over
on a
again.
loop. So yeah, there's quite a lot of work goes into that, quite a lot of thought, but I think he did a great job, and we were very pleased with what he came up with.
Can you talk a little bit about what we can expect from Regency Solitaire 2 at all?
Sure, yeah. Well, basically the whole idea of Regency Solitaire was that you're doing up a ballroom. That's kind of the meta game. So as you go around playing cards, you gradually get these cool things that you can either wear or put around your ballroom so that you yourself can host a ball. And that's, you know, that's kind of what you're trying to upgrade. This is sort of the little fun thing where you're collecting stuff as you go along, and you want to complete it. You want to get all the nice things for your ballroom. You want to see what they do, because all the things in your ballroom actually do something in the game as well, whether that's a passive or an active ability. So that's kind of what's going on in the background. I think I can probably give away, we're working on Regency Solitaire 2 now, which is a direct sequel set 1 year later than Regency Solitaire. That there was also my inspiration for this game, whereas my first game came from the kind of Regency romance, will they, won't they, gambled fortune. My inspiration for the second one came from a really interesting garden designer called Humphrey Repton, who was working in the Regency period. And he used to make incredible gardens, kind of landscape gardens for extremely wealthy people. And he really was one of the people, along with people like Capability Brown, who influenced what we expect when we go to visit a certain type of very grand English garden. So what Humphrey Repton did, which I think was really beautiful and clever, was he created these books, and he would bring them to his wealthy clients to show them, and they would have one page showing a sketch that he'd done of their garden as it was now. And it was literally like one of these, the children's kind of lift the flap peekaboo books. You know, you would lift the flap on the on the piece of paper, and there would be a drawing of what their garden would look like underneath.
Oh,
So
wow.
sometimes it would be, because obviously they, for pre-digital, it was like the before and after shot, right?
Right.
So yeah, and he would literally do that for them and sort of say, look, wouldn't it be wonderful if you just had, just kill out that village over there. That looks ugly. And of course you need a huge waterfall here, so that church has got to go. It was
Right.
really big scale stuff. We're talking major renovations where giant pieces of landscape are carved out, huge massive trees get lugged around, bits of sort of imaginary fantasy architecture like follies, or bits of Greek temples that aren't at all Greek temples, get sort of plonked around the landscape, so that when you're standing by your stately home or taking a lovely promenade around your lake or whatever, everywhere you turn in the landscape, there's something to draw the eye that looks very beautiful and, elevates your experience.
That's
So
fantastic.
yeah, so this guy, so I was looking into what to do for the next game. I had various ideas, but eventually this idea of doing up a garden came through to me as being a really nice idea for a garden. So I think I can say that Bella's doing up her garden in the next game. There is a romance, and it's going to be, there's a lot of secrets and scandal, and maybe some breaks and maybe some scandal sheets and gossip and things like that going on that need to be sorted out. And yeah, so that's
Very Regency England.
yeah, exactly. And I think it was a bit like that. There's a magazine that's still, I think, in print today called The Tattler, which just literally is about printing gossip about wealthy and well-known people, and that's
Oh my gosh. Is it challenging to make a sequel in terms of thinking up different gameplay mechanics and just a sort of different angle to bring people back in?
Yeah, I mean, I guess just to sort of step back a bit from the Regency Solitaire, another part that we have is Shadowhand, which was kind of a bit of a side quest where we have this lovely character in Regency Solitaire who was kind of a godmother. And we thought, what was her youth like? And I sort of thought back, okay, so what's like 40, 50 years back from Regency, what was going on then? And that was really the era of England being quite lawless, and roads not being well regulated, and highwaymen, and quite a lot of piracy and smuggling and all this kind of stuff was going on in that era. So in order to make a slightly different kind of mechanic, which we wanted to do, we wanted to try something a bit more sort of puzzle quest like, where you play, rather than doing the letters, you play cards to drive the gameplay, but then characters come on and battle each other as a result of what cards you've picked. This was our kind of idea. So we went back and chose this character who was an older lady in Regency Solitaire to show her misspent youth back in the sort of 1770s. And yeah, that fitted really well. So we kind of chose the historical era and the type of characters to suit the type of mechanics we wanted to have. So she very much in her game has got outfits and disguises. She's got, there's a lot of weapons and things like that, but they're weapons that, again, I went to museums or went looking online and found examples of some really interesting and strange weapons and things that were around.
I saw that, and they're very
yeah,
detailed.
some of them are quite
Shadowhand.
bizarre, how they work, and we wouldn't, unless you're a weapons aficionado, you wouldn't have thought of some of these things. Yeah, and again, the style of dress, costume was vastly different. Then everybody was still wearing the big wigs and the giant puffed out skirts and stuff. So that was fun as well to explore that era of history. So yeah, I think going back, we're now going back to Bella and her story and going forward, and we're doing something a little bit simpler without the battling. We're going back to this idea of playing cards, to gather things for your garden, but there will be some new, some of it has got to be familiar because we want to keep existing fans happy, but we're also introducing a few new mechanics and new things as well to keep the gameplay fresh and make sure, there's something a bit different. Obviously new locations, new story, some new characters, some old favorites. Yeah.
That's really interesting. How many hours do you think did you do of research, for these games? I would imagine quite a bit.
I can probably, I kind of log all my hours, so I can probably look that up after and send it to you. Hundreds, couple of 100 hours maybe per game, I would guess.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, there's a little bit of a fine line between, I think when I've made my first game, there was a tendency to want every single historical detail absolutely accurate and to get quite hung up on that. I think as I've gone along and made more games, I've learned, obviously when it's important to have it exactly right, and when to let, maybe artists or our imagination and what gameplay things we want to happen, to slightly stretch, reality in order to make it fun. Because at the end of the day, the game has to be fun for players. They have to enjoy it. We don't want to sort of force them into some very strict historical straitjacket to stop them, enjoying the game. But yeah, by and large, I have found that keeping things as historically accurate as possible has actually helped, because history is so weird and wonderful that there's loads of, like I said, these strange weapons that do odd things that we, wouldn't have put those mechanics into the game if we hadn't known about that. And as you go into the history, all sorts of strange, weird and wonderful mechanics or bits of folk history or stories or whatever suggest themselves. Like female pirates in the South China Seas was something I didn't know anything about, and then I read a bit about that and thought, okay, so maybe it's okay to include, kind of a Chinese pirate. So I did, that sort of thing. So it's not necessarily just casting about. It's like you just start sifting through history and you find all these lovely little things. You think, yeah, that would work. That person could come into my game, or that object could come into my game.
What is your favorite kind of weird, wacky weapon in Shadowhand?
Oh, gosh. Well, they're all a bit strange. I mean, we've got quite a lot of agricultural tools.
Right? I mean,
like there's these people, there are these people roaming around in Glastonbury, which is not that far from where we live actually. And there would have been a lot of sort of willow and stuff growing there then. It was quite swampy for like making baskets and things like that. So there's people going around with bill hooks, kind of like big hooked scythe-likey things for cutting the wood. So yeah, they can get used as weapons, but also funny things like a firebomb blunderbuss, which is a very specific sort of gun that they used in the Navy. And I think when you fired it actually sort of fired a flaming projectile. Funny things like that. And sort of boarding hooks, which was something that looked a bit like a tomahawk. Again, it was kind of a Navy weapon, and you used it to hook onto the ship you were trying to climb onto and literally kind of scrabble your way up onto the ship. Like, it's piracy basically. And then when you got there, you'd probably hit someone around the head with it as well. So yeah, there's lots of strange things that I've learned about myself through researching the game.
I definitely do. I definitely had fun with it and Shadowhand.
Good.
I think these games are a fun way to pass the time, but they're kind of, when you think about it, they're kind of educational, right? Like they sort of make you want to look up things like, Regency England and is this real and did this really happen? And it did. And
I hope so. Yeah, I mean, we did sneak in a couple of interesting characters. So like in Shadowhand, there's the Chevalier d'Eon, who was a real historical character who kept he was a sort of political intrigue spy kind of person. And I say I think we might call them transgender today, but I'm not sure. They used to flip back and forth between France and England, depending which court they were in favor with. And at a certain point, I believe the King of France told him that he was so good at being disguised as a woman that from now on he should only be dressed as a woman. So he went around, or she went around as a woman then for a while, and I think eventually flipped back. So, but they were an amazing swords person. So we put them in the game.
Did you work on Going Medieval as well?
I did. Yeah, I've been working. I had a little break when Jake was doing something different, and I had some free time, so I worked doing the writing for Going Medieval. That was really nice. Actually, they're a really nice team based in Serbia, and I get on with them really well. They're really, really into the same kind of just deep dive into history and all the objects and all the things you could do and what they were called. So I had a lovely time researching, again, another period of history I didn't know a great deal about, from England, just shortly after the plague. Although we wrote an alternate history, but all the things to do with the food, how people kept their animals, what they wore, what crops were grown, how you could cook them, or what kind of, brew them, what construction materials, you name it. I got to write all the lore for that and the little stories of the people, and I had a brilliant time doing that. So yeah, I was very fortunate to get to work on that.
If you had an unlimited budget, though, an unlimited team and time, is there a particular game that you would love to make or seen be made? I'm curious. Gosh. I like to ask game developers that.
I don't know. We did kind of, we've had a few slightly more esoteric ideas, but I don't know if they would catch on. Like, would somebody like to be a monk going around the British Isles in a little coracle, stopping off and, founding monasteries, say, in like the 8th century or something like that? Would that be fun? We also really want to make a game about Scotland. So, watch this space. In a couple of years, there might be some kind of history / Scotland themed game.
Well, thank you again for joining me.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for inviting me.